When I finished up with the Callisto Protocol, I thought this would be a fairly straightforward video. I had a good time playing it, beat it a couple times, got the DLC and liked that too. I didn't play it when it first came out because the reviews were pretty bad. It wasn't easy finding a YouTube video from someone that really enjoyed it at launch. They mostly ranged from, it's alright, to, man, that thing is trash. Given how much hype there was for this game, considering it is a new horror IP from one of the co-creators of Dead Space, it ended up being a monumental disappointment. But after having finally played it, I really couldn't understand why. So I went back and listened to those reviews from launch. I just couldn't relate. Some things made sense. Bad PC optimization. I played it on the PS5, so I don't know. The game is absolutely gorgeous and runs smooth. At least on that machine. Other things I can understand, but I was fine with. Cliched story and a cliffhanger ending. I thought the story was good enough. I liked it. Not the best, but it did the job. I didn't mind the cliffhanger. The game was supposed to launch a franchise, so things like that make sense to me. People were saying the game wasn't scary. I'm not the best person to ask about that because I don't find games scary. The most I could expect from a scary game is to make me feel tense, not knowing where the next attack is coming from. In that regard, Callisto Protocol does an amazing job. Environments are all appropriately creepy looking. Walking down a poorly lit hallway, anticipating an ambush that may or may not happen. The game keeps you on your toes. This tension is also compounded by the excellent sound design. This is one of those games that you absolutely have to play with headphones on. Hearing monsters scurrying around or crawling through vents above you only adds to the sense of paranoia that a game like this should deliver. It nails that sci-fi horror aesthetic, although I wouldn't actually call it scary. There's no subtlety to it. It's all too in your face at all times. To me, it was more action sci-fi with a greater emphasis on body horror. The combat system also diminishes the scares somewhat. This is one aspect of the game where I felt the greatest disconnect from what I heard in the reviews. So many people bashing the combat. It's frustrating and unbalanced. The 1v1 nature of the melee doesn't work against multiple enemies. Changing and reloading weapons is clunky and would get interrupted by an attack. Healing is too slow. I did not agree with any of this at all. I have to admit, there was this one area early in the game where I almost agreed with some of these complaints. It's a tutorial for environmental kills that traps you in a room and you have to deal with a few waves of 2 and 3 enemies at a time. I got kind of annoyed and started to think maybe they were right about the combat not being suited for larger groups of enemies. But I very quickly got the hang of it, and the combat ended up becoming my favorite part of the game. Melee itself is visceral, and your weapon has a satisfying thud to every hit. Dodging and blocking felt natural, even though it is a bit weird how they went about it, using the left stick instead of a button, but there's a nice rhythm to it, and it responds well to enemies you're not auto-locked to. It never really felt like they're taking cheap shots at you while you're fighting one. It's almost like they'd take turns having a go at you, with one monster attacking you just as you finish a combo against another one. You are constantly being swung at from all angles with just enough time to react to the next hit. The sound design really helps this as well, with little grunts letting you know that another attack is about to land. The only time I'd be swarmed or overwhelmed was if I got greedy, trying to squeeze in an extra hit, or I was spamming recklessly. You are given more than enough tools for crowd control. Telekinesis gauntlet, your guns, both of which control well. Fights were never frustrating or unbalanced. They were intense and fun. Healing didn't seem too slow to me, just slow enough to where you have to pick the right moment to do it, only adding to the intensity. I had no issues with weapon swaps and reloads. Dodging while doing it didn't seem to affect anything. Switching the shotgun attachment of the pistol did require an extra button press that makes it clunkier than it should be, but I claw grip my controller, so it was manageable. For someone that doesn't, taking your thumb off the analog stick to do this leaves you an open target, so I can see this being an issue. But overall, combat was solid. I really have no idea what they're talking about with this. I do have a few minor complaints, but they're mostly about level design and UI. There's too many vents and crawl spaces to go through, and while the areas are well put together for the most part, it was like the developers think players are idiots, with big stupid arrows pointing in the direction you're supposed to go for absolutely no reason whatsoever. The game is already very linear as it is. It's not like you could get lost, so why? The HUDless UI is nice and immersive. Then there's this big stupid button prompt that pops up on screen. It kinda breaks that immersion. I wanted to get rid of them, but there's no way to do so you're stuck with a giant press triangle now thing in your face. I would have liked more and better boss fights. What's there isn't enough. It should have been a bit longer. I liked the game. I wanted more. Other than these things, I enjoyed Callisto Protocol far more than I was expecting. It all looked like an easy review. The critics are full of shit. The game is much better than the meta. Go play it. It's just something felt off. Kept eating away at me. How was my experience so vastly different than the reviews? It didn't add up. I kept digging, even took a look at the patch notes, and there it was, clear as day. Tweaks to the combat, faster animations, little changes here and there. Turns out, those reviews were right. I couldn't see what they were talking about because those issues weren't there. My experience was vastly different than theirs. And better. This really sucks for the game. There's no way to go back and update those review scores to reflect its current state, and it's not like most review outlets would bother doing so anyway. The Callisto Protocol is much improved since launch. Someone interested in the game that does not know this will look at these numbers and think it's not worth playing, which it very much is. It ruined its own launch. There is no going back from that. Like they say, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. It got the score it deserved. It's just not the score it should currently have. It did this to itself. If the game was really in that condition, it should have been delayed until it was more polished. This is usually more the fault of the publisher than the developer, forcing a game to come out before it's ready to hit deadlines or whatever. Another thing I think affected review scores was the inevitable comparisons to Dead Space. The word spiritual successor was thrown around quite a bit. This was unfair, I think, because it appeared to come more from the media and the fans than the developers themselves. You could tell from interviews that the director was trying to distance himself from this. A lot of, yeah, but it's really its own thing. I get that. After playing it, I see where it's coming from, but it doesn't matter. The comparisons were going to be there. And short of being a masterpiece, this was a losing battle from the start. On top of that, the similarities are impossible to ignore. The whole aesthetic is very Dead Spacey. I'm not sure if this was deliberate. Rather, I think it has more to do with it being from the same guy, so it shares a lot of the same sensibilities. Regardless, when you open yourself up to being compared to a better game, you will end up looking worse. On its own, Callisto Protocol is a quality product. At least now it is. If I were to rate it, it would be in the low 80s. A few flaws, but a fun, spoopy roller coaster ride. It made me want more. I'm on my third playthrough and still having a great time. I might be in the minority on this, but I also had fun with the Final Transmission DLC, which, shit, I might be the only person apparently. If you tried this at launch and you didn't like it, I understand that, but maybe give it another shot. You might like it now. If you haven't tried it yet, please ignore those bad reviews. It took long enough, but the Callisto Protocol is finally better than that.